farming, you mentioned you farm, and have you noticed in the last 15 or 20 years, do you ever get your soil tested?
Yeah, we test the soil every single fall and spring.
Okay. And are you having to add things that you didn't used to have to add?
Yes and no, it really depends upon farming practice. So, when I was raised, or as I was raised, we were told in the old days, they'd say, for every 6 years of planting your crops, 7th year you leave it, summer, fall, and then it regenerate itself. Kind of do the same, the farms that we own, we kind of do the same thing. So we don't necessarily see having to add, for example, more phosphate or nitrogen. I do know farmers, for example, that every single year they have to pound that soil with urea. It would be interesting to see what their studies look like, but for us, or for me in our farm, being somebody who studies climate and have access to guys that know about nutrients, very cognizant of what's going on with the soil. And just to add to that, a couple of my neighbors, they do a lot about soil remediation, and so we're constantly looking at, what can you add to the soil that will down the road help you use less chemicals or more fertilizers.
Okay. The reason I was asking, I used to sell farmers. I was in the oil business.
Oh, yeah.
One of those bad guys. And then I formed a company called Prevent a Spill. So now I'm a good guy. And I have some patents on spill systems for the petroleum industry. And so I utilize my knowledge from being a bad guy to being a good guy. But anyway, and I sold my oil business about 7 years ago, because 10 years ago I was diagnosed with leukemia. I was in the oil business too long, for 40 some years. My father started in it in 1947, and I grew up in the family business. But I started a company called Prevent a Spill, and I have several United States patents on spill systems, plus then I got a patent on a vapor recovery system for fuel tankers. We waste 1 million gallons of gasoline a day because they burn off the vapors. And my patent condenses those vapors, turns them back into gasoline. And it causes global warming. And I do it all underground, so it doesn't use as much energy. Eli Lilly in Indianapolis has chemicals they're emitting that's 200 degrees, and they could condense those back into vapors. But anyway, back to the soil thing. One of the farmers told me he has to add sulfur to his fields, and he gets a guy from Illinois to test his soil every couple years.
Right.
And I'm wondering if we're using more low sulfur fuel now than we used to, and he never used to have to add sulfur to his fields, and now he does. I mean, is it reversing, do you think, quite a bit?
It's possible. I don't know. I'd like to see his soil samples.
Yeah.
One of the issues I find is, some of these guys will sample every 5, 6, 7-year gap. It's hard to really tell what's going on with the soil. Minimum, I think you should do sampling once a year. Better to do twice a year. Springtime, just before you apply anything, fall time, because by that time, over the 6, 7, 8 months, you deplete a lot of nutrients. And so that's a good predictor of what's going on with that soil. Why the sulfur is changing.
Now, he always said everybody that puts lime on their fields, there's a lot of lime in Indiana, they go 2 counties away because the lime in their own county is too similar to the ground that they are farming. So they go a couple counties away, and the lime's enough different that it benefits them more by putting lime on their ground and stuff. But I was just curious. Of course, I did notice too, a lot of farmers are getting away from using Roundup, and they're going back to conventional tilling. No farmers really like to cultivate. That was a boring job. They'd rather be out on the golf course, and so they used Roundup. And our water suffered for years because of it. But now with these self-driving tractors, they're going back to, they don't have to drive the tractor. They just get in there instead. So they're cultivating now, which may use a little bit of fuel, but we're not using Roundup. And that should help our ecosystem immensely.
And you see, even here locally, there's a lot of farmers that are doing intercropping. So there's a guy on, it's not Whitbeck, I think it's Fruitvale Road, and if you drive down Fruitvale, he's got a big cornfield. Even there, you can see this guy, I don't know what he owns, 500-600 acres, and every 2 acres, so he's got corn, and then in between he's got hay, and then corn, some hay. And I see in the old days, they used to do stuff like that.
Right.
But they're now turning back to that and doing intercropping, which is good.
Rotate,
Good for
yeah.
the environment,
Mhm.
absolutely.
When I started this company, I helped write this book, and it's for spill prevention for petroleum facilities, but most oil companies don't feel like they have to do it, and they're skirting the law. Really, they're supposed to do it to prevent problems like you have at the Clymore site, because a lot of ground is, contaminated, whatever, and it could be prevented. The guy that's the head of the EPA looked at my product. I went to a symposium the EPA had put on in 2006, and he looked at my product video, 4-minute video. Mark Howard is his name. He consults with API all the time, American Petroleum Institute. He said my product was the best idea he'd seen so far, and I don't think he was just saying that to make me feel good.
Yeah, you need to take that to Wesco.
Pardon?
You need to take that to Wesco, not on.
Yeah.
Against Wesco.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry for
That's
talking too
okay.
much.
You're very interesting.
My wife will be happy if I can start selling some spill systems, because I put about my whole life savings into this company.
So,
Okay.
what other?
A couple things. One, it sounds like one of the answers, one of the factors would be if we had a universal sewer system around this lake. And I would suggest if you want to know what happened at Gull Lake in Kalamazoo County, it was unbelievable the difference it made in that lake. And secondly, I hope you keep DuPont's feet to the fire, because what you were saying sounded just exactly what Hooker was doing, digging a big hole, throwing that stuff in. And speaking of Hooker, is anybody keeping track of it?
Well, I think, Hooker Chemical, it's similar to DuPont in a way, that there's a line of wells that capture the polluted
Same
groundwater.
thing, yeah.
And it runs through a carbon treatment system, and then, that has to go through a federal program. And it is monitored, and then there are people like us who, we do pay attention to the monitoring reports and things like that. Honestly, it wouldn't hurt if there was a group like the White Lake Public Advisory Council that was able to continue paying attention, like the DuPont Citizens Group, because, it made a big impact to have that group for 22 years, focusing on the problems in the lake to the extent that we could, and, having something like that, myself, I feel like would be good, but it's also something that is hard for volunteers. I actually tried to keep an effort going 2 years after we officially, got off the list, but, it's hard to keep it going as an all-volunteer.
Can't you get any assistance from the DNR or wherever they call it these days? I mean,
Well,
they nailed Hooker.
we can talk after the meeting, but for the challenge is, the good news was, like Claire said, there's the good news, bad news, we got off the list, because we worked hard, we worked with the state and federal officials, and we got off the list. The money that helped to pay, the money went to the conservation district, some money went to scientists. I mean, every year there was a grant that focused on the specific issues related to the lake and the program, and for a while I was paid for a certain period of time to do all of the public education and outreach, hours of time. And once you're out of that program, then you're out of line for that money. That money goes to the other areas of concern in Michigan or other areas in the Great Lakes that still are working on their problems, like Muskegon Lake. So it's a very challenging thing. And like I said, I ran the organization 2 years after as a volunteer. And I think Claire was part of that, right? I think we call it the White Lake Environmental Network, but it was hard after doing it for 22 years and continue to run it without the support of the funding that we received. And we're a small community, and we do compete for volunteers. It's a good community of
Tanya,
volunteers.
tell me if this is right, there was a consent judgment against Hooker, and they were required to clean up,
Yes.
and they did,
Well,
to what, to the level that was technologically feasible at that time.
well,
Whereas DuPont, they're just now in the process of getting a consent order on them. It's been, for them, it's just been voluntary, testing and things
well,
like that.
it's, I mean, Hooker Chemical really had some imminent public health hazards. DuPont did not, and I think that's one reason why the difference. I mean, when DuPont had 20,000 barrels on the back 40 that were leaking. So, two different stories. Hooker Chemical also was put into the spotlight right during the time that Love Canal
Sure.
came into the spotlight, so it was kind of an urgent situation, and the state did negotiate a consent decree with the company, and we, the Public Advisory Council, interacted with the state and the federal officials over time as different decisions were made about that site. The unfortunate part of Hooker Chemical and its site is that the groundwater contamination was considered to be, the term is intractable, especially because of the 20,000 barrels on the back 40 that had leaked. It was, and it's,
You mean their multi-million-dollar wastewater treatment system?
well,
I got a letter that says that, what, we spent $1 million on a wastewater treatment system. 50-gallon drums. That's what I said. Is
yeah.
anybody keeping track of it?
Yeah, we are to the extent possible. It's not something that's a public health hazard. That all of the contaminated groundwater goes to wells and it is treated. But the challenge is that groundwater, the conservative estimate is 1,000 years of cleanup, because and maybe Rick can help, it's kind of an insoluble, it doesn't flush easily because of so much of the product and because of the type of product. So, definitely I don't, myself and others who worked on this, we have nothing against the workers. They were good jobs and people were innocent. No one expected that, this company would not be a good neighbor. DuPont's in a different situation in that they were under the law that they were in, they were not considered an imminent public health risk. And they had to be in a certain category in order for the state of